They say a week is a long time in football and a lot can happen. Well, a lot has happened at Newcastle United. How's it, everybody? Welcome back to Meet Fontainer. A lot of news. Let's get straight into it. 3 pieces of news we want to talk about in this video. Number 1, PIF in talks with Newcastle United to fund plans. Number 2, Newcastle completed a purchase of a significant portion of Leazes Terrace. And last but not least, the club confirmed £30 million worth of investment into St James's Park and the training ground. So a lot to talk about. Let's get straight into it. So first and foremost, news broke on Reuters, which is a very well-renowned established media outlet. The article said that PIF are in talks with investors over them taking a minority stake in Newcastle United as part of fundraising plans for the club's stadium. And that was confirmed by 3 different sources. Fundamentally, what does this mean? It doesn't mean that PIF are looking to sell up and get out of Newcastle. It means that they are looking to sell a portion of their shares. It would obviously mean that the Reuben brothers, who own 15%, don't forget PIF own 85%, that they would both potentially sell a portion of their shares. It might mean PIF sell 5%, for example, and that money coming in for the sale of those shares gets reinvested into potentially some of the stadium plans. I do think that potentially some of the investors could be linked to sponsorships as well. I know initially there might be a bit of resistance to losing the name St James's Park, especially with Mike Ashley and what he did with the Sports Direct Arena and Wonga, etc. I think this is a little bit more structured. It's a little bit more thought out and planned, and would take a lot of consultation with supporters. But like it or lump it, Arsenal did this moving from Highbury to the Emirates, Man City from Main Road to the Etihad. Over time, it just becomes the stadium name. I think we all need to come to terms with the realization that bringing investment into the club, which involves PIF selling some of their shares, may be linked to a stadium renaming, and there's going to be resistance with it, but I think we're going to have to get on board with that. Then on to the second piece of massive news which broke. The club announced on their official website that they had completed a purchase of a significant proportion of the historic Leazes Terrace building next to St James's Park. The acquisition of a substantial majority of the Grade 1 listed structure includes the northern, the southern, and western elevations, including all of the areas facing the stadium. Now, to be clear, let's have a look at the stadium and let's have a look at exactly which portions these included. So as we know, this is the beauty of St James's Park, and I'll highlight over here which is the northern, the southern, and the western elevations, including all of the areas facing the stadium. They also went on to say that it includes most of the eastern elevation, with a small block of private residences remaining in part of this building. The article goes on to say that this is a strategic purchase and is part of the club's long-term planning as it continues to assess all credible and feasible options for the future of its home stadium. It provides Newcastle United with greater flexibility and ensures any future decision supports the club's ambitions as well as its responsibilities to the local community and the city of Newcastle upon Tyne. The club recognises the building's historic and architectural significance and is committed to its preservation. Don't forget that. There are no plans to change the current use of Leazes Terrace, which is currently let for a student accommodation, and the club will retain the building's existing property management operator. The investment to purchase Leazes Terrace does not impact the club's trading position. That just basically means because we've bought that, it doesn't mean we have to sell a player, or it doesn't mean our transfer budget is affected in any way, shape or form. There has been a lot of talk on social media as to why and what this means. And when I first read it, I must admit I was slightly confused in terms of what it means. Does it mean that they are now more likely to expand St James's Park? Or does it mean that they are now more likely to build a new stadium? I think opinion was really split down the middle. Some fans were really confident that it meant the East Stand was definitely going to be expanded. The whole issue of access to light for the residents in the eastern elevation now goes away because Newcastle is in sense the owner and landlord of this property. Most of the people who are staying in these residences are university students. So you wouldn't expect that they have been there for 10, 15, 20, 30 years. You'd think that they're going to be there for 5 or 6 years and then move on. Let's break it down very quickly into a couple of the options. Something we've got to rule out, I think, very, very quickly. Because we own Leazes Terrace, we can either knock it down and or move it brick by brick to a new location. Something we need to bear in mind and consider is that Leazes Terrace, as we know, is a grade 1 building. It was built in 1829, finished in 1834, and it received grade 1 status in 1950. For reference, St James's Park was built in 1880, 45 years after Leazes Terrace was built, and Newcastle United only started playing there in 1892. In summary, Leazes Terrace has been around 45 years before St James's Park was even built. It is a historic piece of land in the city. It means a lot. If you look at PIF's approach historically, I don't think they are interested in ruffling feathers. I don't think they are interested in just going gung-ho and against the council and just doing what they want to do just because they own the land and now the buildings. And don't forget, they don't own the whole of Leazes Terrace. There is a portion of the eastern block that they still don't own. Let's look at the option of expanding the eastern stand. I do think it becomes more possible to do that, but I think there is one big issue which is standing in Newcastle's way, and that is over here, St James's Terrace. St James's Terrace is grade 2 listed. I did recently watch a video interview with the owner of St James's Terrace. He purchased the property in 2016. He's a Newcastle United fan. He seemed pretty keen on the idea of Newcastle expanding the stadium, but more keen on the financial investment coming into the city via the club. The elephant in the room is very obvious for everyone to see. The issue historically was Leazes Terrace, but it now becomes more an issue with St James's Terrace. St James's Terrace proximity to the east stand is way, way closer. There is the service road down there, which is Maple Lane, which apparently is very easy to relocate or reposition, so that is not a sticking point. The sticking point is St James's Terrace. Look at how close it actually is to St James's Park, and look how far the Leazes Terrace is to St James's Park. Does it mean that Newcastle's eastern stand and obviously the Gallagate end will be expanded to match the existing enhanced stand of the Leazes end and Milburn stand? I do think this would obviously be option 1 if there weren't these issues around these listed buildings adjacent to the existing stadium. I still do think that the most viable option is that of building a new stadium in Leazes Park. Before anyone gets on my back regarding the biodiversity, the bats, the ducklings, the insects, the birds, etc. Yes, I know that is going to be an issue. Yes, I know that will be an issue and it will have to be a consideration. But I do think if the club look at the approach which Tottenham did, which was build 3/4 of the stadium, knock St James's Park down, then finish the last quarter in the remaining area where St James's Park used to stand, could be converted into a green space, which in effect gives back and or increases the biodiversity. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody. And then if you look at the property of Leazes Terrace and that being adjacent to a green space, or maybe a space for some retail, or maybe an avenue or a park, almost like the Wembley Way. You know, if you have 60,000 people walking past a shop, you obviously increase the visibility, the footfall, and the more likelihood that people can eat, drink, socialize, do whatever in that space. I did see some really wacky images of an enhanced east stand, which is right up to the Leazes Terrace. I do think the Leazes Terrace would be absolutely beautiful if that were converted into a hotel space. There's a bit of talk about that being used for the Newcastle staff or the backroom staff or the back of house, legal teams, etc., HR, IT. I don't think that you would place the middle and back office teams right in the city centre. There's no need for them to be that close to the stadium. They can do that work from the training ground. Which leads me nicely into the third piece of news, which is that the club confirmed they've invested £30 million into St James's Park and the training ground facilities. This is where I've got to put my hands up and say that I was massively wrong. In my last video, I was really nervous and anxious that PIF were pulling out. If you look what was happening at Live Golf. But this is clearly what the board and the ownership were discussing at Matfin Hall a couple of weeks ago. There's no coincidence that they had the huge meeting at Matfin Hall. They have informally not made any announcement about Eddie Hall. Does that mean he's staying? Does that mean he's going? I still think it's 99%, not 100% that he is staying. But what was clearly on the agenda and which needed confirmation was looking for additional investors by PIF selling a minority stake. They will still be the owners of Newcastle. And second of all was the purchase of Leazes Terrace. And last of all was the confirmation that the club have pumped £30 million into St James's Park and into the training ground. Don't forget, the purchase of Leazes Terrace cost the club reportedly between 20 and 25 million pound already. So this additional 30 million pound is a real good sign that PIF are committed and are in this for the long run. Now, this £30 million investment into St James's Park and the training ground. First, let's look at where the money's going at St James's Park. The news was released as a nice little video, which included David Hopkinson, the club CEO, and Ross Wilson, the sporting director. It was nice actually to hear from him for a change. Hopkinson said this summer we are investing more than £30 million across our facilities, from fully rebuilding our pitch and enhancing fans' matchday experience in St James's Park to extending our training centre, which will become the Knox, as well as investing in our academy and Newcastle's women's headquarters. I made a video many months ago about news on a BBC Two article that Newcastle had received planning permission to do enhancements and upgrades into the club's training ground. I don't really understand why the club didn't do any communication back then when they received planning permissions, telling us fans A, how much it cost, and B, what exactly they were doing. These areas will include medical, performance and dressing room facilities. Now that is really good news. It's really nice, and I think what is even better news is that the club acknowledged that they are still looking at a state-of-the-art training facility, most likely in Woolsington near the airport. But between now and then, they are looking to do something. So they don't really want to stand still. They're looking to improve. That is really fantastic news. That is exactly the type of thing we want to hear as Newcastle fans. We know we can talk for hours and hours about the football on the pitch, about Eddie Howe, is he in, is he out, about the players, the formations, etc. And yes, that is fundamental to the club's success, a huge, massive, pivotal part of it. But those are things which we sometimes can't really control. You know, a VAR decision, a injury to a player. What is inside our control is exactly the thing that Hopkinson Wilson and the club's COO Brad Miller spoke about in this video, which is things about investing and improving the club's facilities. It is an absolute no-brainer that if you improve the home, which is the training ground and the stadium for players, the club becomes more of an attractive proposition for attracting outside players to the club. Now you might think, what difference does it make? Because Spurs have got an outstanding stadium and look at what's happened to them. This is where I say it's not just about the outside, the background, the boardroom, the infrastructure. It's also about the football on the pitch, the manager, the players, and also about the money in terms of how much revenue you're bringing in, but what you do with that money. How smart are you with your acquisitions? There's a massive difference at 70 million, 80 million pound flops at the big six clubs. For example, Anthony Hoyland, Pepe, for example. Newcastle do not have that luxury to do that. If you look at Brighton, for example, and the way that their recruitment is more data driven, there's more science behind it. That is where the club is heading. They've made huge amounts of recruitment in the back of house, in the scouting department over the last couple of months. Then with regards to the enhancements at St James's Park, I did speak about them in my last video, but contrary to reported belief, these enhancements are not costing £1 or £2 million. This is part of the £30 million which goes to the training ground and the stadium. I can't believe that this stadium is still using halogen lights. I introduced LED lighting completely in my building in 2015. So it shows you 10 years ago, and the club is still trying to catch up. One of the slightly contentious issue is that the club is relaying the turf at St James's Park. I have seen a little kickback that it means that the slope is being removed. It's not being removed completely, but they are flattening it by 3 feet from one side to the other. So over 100 meters, that's not going to make a huge difference. But they are introducing some better tech, for example, undersoil heating. Some really great, fantastic news that Newcastle are not standing still. Hopefully this gives us a little bit of good vibes going into the final game of the season and obviously into the summer, where there's going to be huge speculation on transfers, but we'll get into those in other videos. That's it for now. If you do like what you're hearing, please do give us a like and subscribe, and don't forget,